Hi, Revive fam. Welcome back to another chat. Today, I want to share a word from God with you about comparison. We've been walking in a direction. God has placed us in the direction of understanding purpose. And today, I'm going to share with you a word about comparison, how comparison kills. Now, before we hop onto the word that God has shared with me, I want to say to all of our first time visitors, if you are a first time listener on our channel, welcome to our family. We are so glad to have you as a part of our Revive Ministries family. And I'd ask that you do three things as a part of our family. I ask that number one, you like this video. I ask that you share this video. Maybe as you're listening to it, there's something that resonates with you that you feel could benefit someone else. Go ahead and share it with them. The third thing I ask that you do is subscribe to our channel. Subscribe so that you don't miss out on anything that God shares with me to share with you to next level you in your relationship with Christ. So those three things: like, share, and subscribe. Now, to our A1 Day 1 Revive Ministry family, welcome back to another chat. I'm always excited to get back here with you and share what God has for us corporately as a family, because he's moving us to another level. So before I jump in, welcome to our new family members. Welcome to our A1 Day 1s. So let's go ahead and jump into the word from God, comparison. And what he actually told me was comparison kills. So that is the name of this video, comparison kills. Now I want you to think about the world. Think about how there's so much comparison going on. You have celebrities comparing each other, trying to one up. One person does something, then you have someone else who tries to come out and do something to overshadow them. And not just even in celebrities. You have it in churches, you have it in your job, in your workplace, you have it in family. There's always comparison. But I want you to understand this. When it comes to comparison, that is not how God operates. And as children of God, as believers of Christ, we do not operate on those same standards that the world does. The world compares. The world will look at a person and say, oh, well, they have X, Y, Z. Well, I have this. Let me see what I can do to get this, or to even overtop them and get more than what they have. That's how the world operates. It's always trying to be the best, trying to do the most, if you will. And God is like, that's not how I operate. When I made you, I created you with certain gifts and talents that I didn't give them, because they're not supposed to do that thing. You are. But when we get in the world's way of thinking, all of that just goes out of the door. So it is important to understand, as children of God, comparison, we have to shut the door on comparison. And if you find that, you've been in that situation, all of us have. And if, you're sitting there, well, I've never done that. It can be something very small. It can be something as simple as looking at someone's outfit, comparing what you have on and what they have on. It could be something as small as maybe looking at someone's vehicle, comparing what they drive and what you drive. Comparison doesn't have to be these big, outstanding situations. But the thing is, and we will talk about it in this chat, comparison starts small. And it can grow into something so massive that it takes over your life. And you begin to live in a place of always comparing yourself with others. And that's not God's plan for you. God has a purpose and plan for your life. He has something for you that only you can do. No one else can do it. And you can't do what others do. It's only something that you can do. So let's go ahead and jump into today's chat, what God shared with me. Now I'm going to look down at my notes because I have quite a few. Quite a few pages of notes. Now, the scriptures that are referenced in this chat, I will put in the description field. I'm not going to read. I'm not going to read the scriptures because there are so many, and this chat does focus on the book of 1 Samuel. So in your time, when you have a chance, open up 1 Samuel and just read about, read the scriptures and the verses in 1 Samuel so you can really understand what God showed me and how it relates to comparison. Now, the Bible tells us that before we were in our mother's womb, God knew us. This means God knew every detail of our makeup before we were even conceived. That's deep. Before you even came on this earth in your natural form, before you were in your mother's womb, God knew you. He knew the plan and the purpose for your arrival on earth. That's deep. The Bible also tells us in Isaiah 64, verse 8, that God is the potter and we are the clay. I like how the Message translation puts it. Still, God, you are our Father. We're the clay and you're our potter. All of us are what you made us. You are what God made you. You are not what God made another person. You are specifically designed the way God wanted you to be designed. All the characteristics, all of the traits, God placed that in you for a reason. All of us are made by God. Before you were conceived in the natural, God already knew what you would need to be the person that He envisioned you to be. So when it came time to form you, He already knew what He needed to form you. As He sat at the wheel, molding you, the clay, He knew how much to add here and how much to take away there. He knew what to include. He knew what to remove. He knew exactly what you needed to walk out His plan for your life, which would fulfill His master plan. He looked at one person and said, I'm going to give you an extra pinch of joy, because that joy will be what is needed for people to be drawn to you so that they will be drawn to me. He looked at another person and said, I'm going to give you an extra dose of compassion, because you feeling what others feel will enable you to connect to them and share my love for them. He looked at another person and said, I am going to increase how much determination you have, because it is that determination that I will use for you to tell people about me. When they reject me, you will not lose faith, but you will remain determined to preach my word to the world. So I'm giving you that extra pinch of determination. When God created you, He placed inside of you the things that you need. I'm emphasizing you, because this is about you. It's not about what others have. It's about what God placed inside of you. He did not create you to be like anyone else. Genesis 1 tells us that we were created in the image of God. So if you find yourself being in a place of comparison, compare yourself to God. Compare yourself to Him. Okay, God, I see that you show love to everybody. What am I doing? Okay, well, let me do that. Compare yourself to God. You're in His image. There is no one that can be you, and you cannot be another person. It's like a puzzle. Think about a puzzle. No piece is identical. Each piece is unique. Yet, when they come together and when each piece is placed where it is intended to be placed, you get one puzzle joined together for the perfect fit. All the pieces are different. But when they are placed exactly where it's supposed to be placed, it forms that one big puzzle. Think about the puzzle. If the pieces are not strategically placed to fit, you will not be able to see the finished result. Pieces will be forced to fit while barely hanging on. You cannot try to make something fit in a place where it was not intended to fit. I'm going to say that again. You cannot try to make something fit into a place where it was not intended to fit. This is how comparison works. You cannot try to fit into a place in God's master plan that He did not intend for you to occupy. If He didn't intend for you to be in that space, you can't just jump in and say, oh, well, this is what I'm going to do. He did not create you with those traits. He did not create you with those characteristics. Remember, before we were born, He knew us. When He molded you, He placed inside of you everything you would need to carry out His master plan. So if He didn't give it to you, if it was not His plan for you to be a doctor, why are you trying to force yourself into something that you know is not a part of His plan? If His plan is for you to be a lawyer, why are you trying to be an engineer? If His plan is for you to be a worship leader, why are you trying to be a pastor? You cannot try to fit into a place in God's master plan that He did not intend for you to occupy. Have you ever heard the saying, get in where you fit in? It is important to get in where you fit in God's plan for your life. If you do not, you can lead yourself to a life of being misaligned and chasing other people's journey. When you chase other people's journey, you expose yourself to death. You abort the gifts and talents that God gave you for a specific purpose, and you abort the plan that God created only for you. You become like you're in a rat race, like a hamster on a wheel, running, and getting nowhere. That's because you're not walking in the purpose God has planned for you. When you start looking at other people, what they're doing, what they have, the characteristics that they portray, and you start thinking, well, God, why don't I have those? Because He did not create you to have those. That's why. So you have to embrace what it is that God gave you and understand, God, you gave me these traits for a purpose. Now let me sit with you. Let me build relationship with you so I can understand what it is that you have for me to do so that I can become fulfilled. I can start feeling like I'm fulfilled in my purpose, and I'm not looking at what other people are doing. I'm not comparing myself anymore because I'm using the gifts and talents that you gave me. I'm good. Today I want to talk about David and Saul. Comparison kills. David and Saul. And like I said, I'm not going to read the scriptures because we're talking about all of 1 Samuel. So in your time, go back and read the book of 1 Samuel. But I want to start off just sharing with you, when you start at 1 Samuel chapter 9, There was a wealthy man named Kish, and Kish belonged to the tribe of Benjamin. I'm going to kind of paint a picture for you, so you can understand the whole situation with comparison and how comparison kills. So Kish, wealthy man, belonged to the tribe of Benjamin. And Kish had a son. His name was Saul. Saul was better looking than everyone, taller than anyone in all of Israel. So he was that guy. One day Kish discovers that his donkeys had run off. And he tells his son Saul, he says, go and get one of my servants and you all go and go look for my donkeys. They've run off. So Saul and the servants start on the journey to look for the donkeys. So they look, no sign of the donkeys. And by this time it's getting late. Saul tells the servant, okay, my dad will be concerned with where we are. It's getting late. Let's just go back home. The servant says to Saul, wait, I heard about a man who lives in a near town and he has visions. Everything he says come true. How about let's try one more thing. Let's go to this town to meet this man and see if he can help us out. So Saul's like, you know what? Okay, it's worth a try. Let's do it. They head to the town, and when they arrive, they start inquiring about this man who sees visions. And they're directed to where the man is, and the man's name is Samuel. He's the prophet Samuel. Now, side note, the day before Saul and the servant met Samuel, the day before, they went on a journey to find Saul's dad's donkeys. The day before, God told Samuel, I see how my people are suffering. I have heard their call for help. About this time tomorrow, I am going to send you a man from the tribe of Benjamin who will rescue my people from the Philistines. I want you to pour oil over his head to show the people that he will be their leader. Now, this was the day before Samuel even met Saul and the servant. God told Samuel that a man from the tribe of Benjamin is going to come. He's going to be the one to lead the Israelites. He's going to be the king. And I want you to pour oil over him, anoint him, because he is going to be the king. So the day Saul and the servant met Samuel, the next day, this was after Samuel received the message from God. The next day, the day Saul and the servant were looking for the donkeys, God showed Samuel that Saul was the man God was talking about. So Saul was the appointed one to lead Israel. So Samuel tells them that the donkeys are safe. They're fine. They're safe. He then tells Saul that everything of value in Israel belongs to him and his family. So, Saul, Samuel, the servant are talking, and Samuel's like, you know what? Everything's fine. Don't worry about the donkeys. They're good. And everything in Israel from this point on belongs to you and your family. And Saul looks at him and he's like, what? What are you talking about? He asked Samuel, why are you telling me this? I'm from Benjamin, the smallest tribe in Israel, and my family is the least important tribe. So why are you telling me that my family and I will own everything in Israel? I don't get it. So while they're there in the town, Samuel has this sacred meal that he's going to. And he invites Saul and the servant to attend the meal. He gives Saul the best piece of meat. He tells the cook, okay, I gave you the best piece of meat. Please bring it out and place it in front of him, Saul. After the meal, Samuel tells Saul and the servant to stay in town for the night. They can leave in the morning. He's like, stay here, leave in the morning. The morning arrives, and Samuel walks Saul and the servant to the edge of the town. Samuel tells Saul to tell his servant to go ahead because he needed a few minutes with him just to share something with him. Samuel pours olive oil on Saul's head and tells him that the Lord has chosen him to be the leader and ruler over his people. Think about that. You just go into the town to talk to the prophet to find out where your dad's donkeys are. And you leave the town being told that God has anointed you to be the next king. That's a lot to take in. So, moving on to 1 Samuel 10. Saul leaves after being anointed by Samuel. Samuel gives him instructions and tells him what to expect. One thing Samuel tells Saul is, the Spirit of the Lord will suddenly take control of you. You will become a different person and start prophesying right along with them. After these things happen, do whatever you think is right. God will help you. So later, Samuel and Saul are surrounded by the people. This is after he's been anointed. Saul has been anointed as king. And Samuel and Saul are surrounded by people. And Saul is assigned to lead. And Samuel makes this statement. There is no one like him. He's telling the people, there is no one like him. And the crowd starts shouting, long live the king. So Saul is doing the king thing. And we get to 1 Samuel 13 and things start to change. Saul is used to being in charge at this point because he's the king. He's used to being the one who God anointed to be king. God anointed me to be king, to be a leader, and God is with me. All I have to do is say it. I'm listening to God. I do it, and God is there with me. He's used to being the one who leads others. He's used to having people look to him for resolution. He is used to being tall and good looking. He's that guy. He's that one that when he walks into the room, his presence just demands attention. Now let's go back to what Samuel said about Saul in 1 Samuel 10, what we just said. There is no one like him. Remember that. Samuel said to the people, there is no one like Saul. And of course, there was no one like Saul. Because God created Saul with traits and characteristics that he would need to carry out his purpose as a king. God knew that these traits were needed for people to accept Saul to lead and be king. Saul remained king until he disobeyed God. Saul took it upon himself to prematurely make moves, and God chose another man to lead the people. So this brings us to David. God chose David to be the next king. So Saul was disobedient. The anointing came off, was removed from Saul, and God had already chosen David to be the next king. So we have previously discussed in another chat the story of David being anointed as king. David was the son of Jesse. He was the youngest son and the son who you more than likely would not identify with as being a king. He just didn't look the part. If you recall the story of Samuel finding David, when Samuel saw David's brothers, he thought one of them would be the next king because of what they looked like. After Samuel saw all of the brothers, and after hearing God saying to him, none of these are the king. Yeah, they look the part, but that's not who I have anointed to be king. After all of that, Samuel asked Jesse, David's father, surely you have other sons because none of the sons you showed me are anointed to be the next king. There's got to be. Do you have any other sons? And Jesse says, I do have one more son. I have a son, David. He was the least likely candidate. So Jesse really didn't focus on having David come to meet Samuel because of, again, when you saw David's outward appearance, he didn't fit the identity of what you thought a king would be. He did not look like Saul. Comparison. He did not look like Saul. David was the littlest of his brothers. He was the sheep herder. He spent his time watching over the sheep and protecting them from other animals who were seeking to kill the sheep. That is what he was known for, protecting. He protected the sheep. But you see, we can see something as one way and God sees it another way. So God gave David the trait to protect. It was not, God didn't give him the trait of being tall or being built. He didn't give him traits in his physical makeup, in his stature, that one would identify with a king. But God gave him strength and the ability to protect. As small as he was, God placed inside of him strength and the ability to protect others. We see throughout the Bible where David wrestled with bears and where he killed the Philistine giant Goliath. God gave David this trait because he knew that one day he would need this to lead the people of Israel and be the king. So you think about it. David was anointed king at age 15. He didn't become the actual king until around age 30. So there was almost a 15-year gap. But during this time, David was still walking in and using the traits that God gave him. His strength, his ability. He's slaying a giant that no one else wanted to slay. And David took him down and killed him. David wrestled bears to protect sheep. He was using the traits and characteristics that God put inside of him, not knowing that those characteristics would be used one day for something even greater, for him to step into being king. See what I'm saying? How the traits God places inside of you, sometimes you may not understand. It's like, God, why do I have this? Okay, look at David. He probably said, you know what? I'm out here killing bears, and I'm protecting the sheep. I'm herding sheep, protecting them. But God placed that inside of him, and he allowed that to build so that one day he would be able to fully utilize what God placed in him and protecting Israel as the leader and king of Israel. Now, each Saul and David had different traits. They were not the same, but God gave each of them unique traits that would lead each of them to becoming king. Different traits, but same result. Now here's where the comparison starts. Saul was still king, but he grew fond of David. They became close, and he kept David around. David became close also with Saul's son Jonathan. They became like best friends. And they always had each other's back. That's how close they were. Jonathan gave David his military clothes. He gave David his sword. He gave David his bow and arrow and his belt. David was successful in every single thing he did. And Saul ended up giving him a high position in his army because he saw how David, everything he did was successful. It was a great outcome. Now, if we skip over to 1 Samuel 18, we find that after David killed Goliath, the army went back home. So David killed Goliath and Saul's army went back home. So that was a big feat for them, because when it came to that battle of David and Goliath, even Saul did not want to fight the Philistines. He was afraid. And David was like, you know what? I'll do it. The strength of God. That ability to protect. So David's like, I'll do it. And we know what happens. David killed Goliath. So after David killed Goliath and Saul and his army went back home, as they're walking into the town, the people were celebrating. They were dancing. They were just excited, singing because of the great victory that had just happened. Goliath, the giant, was dead. So think about this. Saul is the king in the army. He's the king. And the army is coming back home. So you know, Saul is probably feeling proud and he's like, yes, we did this. You know, he's the king and he's like, we did this. We won this feat and, you know, we're bad. We got this, God, with God's help. But, you know, we've killed Goliath. We have conquered and it is time to celebrate. So he's probably feeling all happy and excited and proud of the victory because the Philistines were not an easy defeat. They were not an easy feat. But everyone except for David, like I said, was scared for the fight. So as everyone is cheering and celebrating, this is what they're saying. So Saul, David, the army, they're coming back to town and everybody's celebrating. And you hear this. Saul has killed 1,000 enemies. David has killed 10,000. The people are chanting this as they're coming back from the fight. This is how comparison kills. It begins with something little and grows to something that is so big, it is hard to control. Saul has killed 1,000 enemies. David has killed 10,000 enemies. Can you imagine how Saul probably felt? He's the king. You're saying I killed 1,000 and then you're saying David killed 10,000? What are you trying to say? Comparison kills. Comparison and envy is like an infection. It gets worse if it is not treated. Have you ever gone to the doctor because you were not feeling well? You tell the doctor your symptoms and things you have been doing to try to feel better and get rid of whatever's going on. Your doctor examines you and discovers that what you thought was maybe like a small cold is actually a sinus infection, a respiratory infection. What do? When you have an infection in your body, what is the first thing a doctor does? They write you a prescription for an antibiotic. The antibiotic does what? Kills the infection. So once you start taking the antibiotic, the infection goes away, you feel better. Now, infections can also be so severe, not just cold-wise, but it can be so severe that if untreated, it can spread and it can cause death. This is what comparison does. If you do not identify it and check it at the beginning, it can grow to something that will negatively impact you or grow into something that leads to death. In this case, the death of your purpose. Saul began to get angry as the people chanted, Saul has killed 1,000 and David has killed 10,000. Saul's starting to get heated by this. I can't believe they're saying this. I'm the king. What do they mean? I've only killed 1,000 and he's killed 10. He started to feel some kind of way. 1 Samuel 18 verse 8 tells us that Saul's thought was, they are saying that David has killed 10 times more enemies than I ever did. Is that what they're trying to say? Next, they would want to make him king since they think he's all of that. Verse 9 tells us that after Saul heard that song and allowed the comparison to set in, he never trusted David again. Think about that. They had just won a big victory for their people. They defeated the giant Goliath. David killed Goliath. Instead of being happy and just celebrating, yeah, David did it. When Saul heard that when he heard the people, the town people celebrating and chanted, Saul has killed 1,000, David has killed 10,000. That put him in a place where he was like, hold on, I'm the king. It should be more praises, more celebration of what has gone on. And they're sitting here talking about David has killed 10 times more than me. Is that what we're doing now? And because of that, the comparison set in. Just with that small song that was sung by the town people. Comparison set in. And that's why I said before, comparison can start small and grow into something much greater. So let's talk about how this played out. So the Bible tells us after Saul heard that song, he never trusted David again. David had nothing to do with it. David was walking in the abilities, the traits that God placed inside of him. How is Saul going to fault David for walking in his God-given talents? How can he do that? God placed that inside of him. And that's something when it comes to comparison. Identifying what God placed inside of you. Okay, God, this is what you placed inside of me to do. When you see another person winning, and this is the world. The world is so notorious for this. When you see another person winning, why not join in and celebrate the victory? Whatever it is they're winning in, celebrate their success. If that's what God placed inside of them to do and they're winning in that thing, celebrate their success. Because just like they're winning, God has placed something inside of you so that you will win as well. He never trusted David again. No fault of David's. Saul just got in his feelings and never trusted him again. So Saul spent the rest of his life in chaos and revenge. The rest of his life. His mission was to kill David, the one who he once admired and esteemed with high regard. So you're telling me a person who you once really looked at as with high esteem, that you're like, wow, this guy God has given him these talents and, he's really winning at everything. I'm proud of him. But as soon as they're compared with you or you see something that dims your light, you change, you switch up. That's how the world does. Saul was still king at this point. However, God's anointing was removed from him. And that seed of comparison grew so massive inside of him that he devoted his life to finding David, searching for him, and killing him. Instead of saying, you know what? All right, God, I know I didn't handle this right. When I heard those people singing that I killed 1,000 and David has killed 10,000, I shouldn't have acted like that. I should not have responded in that way. So instead of Saul turning back and saying, okay, God, I shouldn't have acted that way. Forgive me. And asking God for instructions on how God wanted him to proceed at this point, he just continued to let the comparison fester and spread. That infection. The Bible says if you live by the sword, you die by the sword. Saul spent many years trying to kill David. He spent the rest of his life trying to kill David instead of walking in purpose. But God was always with David. So Saul was not successful at his mission. It didn't matter how hard he tried. Sneak attacks, whatever it was, David had to hide. He couldn't even be around his family. Think about it. You can't be around your family for important events, for weddings, for graduations, just family time that you're missing out because you're in hiding from someone who wants to kill you. That was David. He was in hiding because Saul wanted to kill him. But God also sent people to help David when he was hiding. So no matter how aggressive Saul was, God's protection was always with David because he was anointed by God for a purpose. The traits, the talents, the gifts, the characteristics that God formed, that God included when he made David, was for the purpose of him walking in leading Israel, being the next king. So, what happens? Saul died by his own sword. The same sword he set out to use to kill David. He died by his own sword. 1 Samuel 31 tells us that Saul was badly wounded in a fight with the Philistines. He took his own sword and stuck the blade into his stomach and fell on it. That was the end of him. That was the end of Saul. That was his demise. He continued life after that comparison set in. He lived the rest of his life trying to kill what he compared himself to. He chased David the rest of his life, trying to kill him. And instead of killing David, he killed himself. Comparison leads to death. And get this though, not only did Saul die in that fight, but so did his 3 sons. And that's a whole nother chat, but I want to say this. When you're not walking in purpose, when you're not being obedient to God's instructions for your life, and when you're trying to do what others are doing or try to be what you see others being, and you're not walking in what God called you to do and you to be, it doesn't just affect you, it affects your family. If you're not properly aligned, that means they're not going to be properly aligned. It affects your generation, the generation after you, the generation after you. It's a domino effect. So not only did Saul die that day, but his 3 sons died as well. Think about it. Has Saul checked himself and said, okay, God, yeah, I was feeling some kind of way when I heard that song, but forgive me. Forgive me, forgive my actions. What do I do now? I'm sure if he did that, things would have turned out completely different. But because he held on to that comparison, that infection, and he did not get treated, comparison killed him and his family. Comparison kills. It is so important to get a true understanding that God created you to do something that only you can do. Although someone may be walking in the same arena of purpose, and I mean in a general sense, that does not mean that you are like another person or another person is like you. And when I say purpose in a general sense, I mean this. You may have 200 people that are all called to pastor churches, but that doesn't mean that God has gifted them all with the same exact traits. God created each person different. And while they're all pastors, they may go about spreading the word of God in a different manner according to the gifts and talents that God gave them. But there's one common goal. The one common goal is leading people to Christ. Remember that puzzle, how each piece is different. There are no identical pieces that are in the puzzle. But when you strategically place them in the right position, that's how the puzzle comes together. You cannot become caught up in and focused on what someone else is doing. That's when comparison starts to set in. Because you're so focused on what they're doing or what this person is doing or what they're doing over here, but you're not focused on what God has for you to do. When you stay focused on what God has for you to do, you don't have time to think about what other people are doing. Because God has you moving. God has you going here. God has you going there. God has you doing this. God has you doing that. You really do not have time to look at what others are doing. And that's another key. That's another thing. If you have that much time to critique and watch every move that someone else is doing, apparently you're not walking in purpose. You're not listening to God's instructions. Because I will tell you, now there are times when God is like, you know what, I want you to sit still. But even in sitting still, your focus is on listening to God. Okay, I'm sitting still, God, but He's still speaking to you and sharing things with you. So if you have that much time to sit there and look at every move someone else is making and comparing you to them, you're clearly not walking in purpose. And that's not shade, but it's to help you understand from this point on. If you find that that's you, stop it, ask God for forgiveness, and start walking in your purpose. Stop focusing on what others are doing. That's how comparison sets in. You cannot become caught up in and focused on what someone else is doing. Let them walk in their gifts and callings while you focus on and walk in the fullness of the gifts and traits that God has placed inside of you to impact the world. Do not try to be like someone else. Be like God and how God created you. I used to tell my kids when they were younger, if you say you want to change natural born traits or characteristic that makes you who you are, you're telling God that He made a mistake when He created you. You know, sometimes your kids, Mom, I wish, or I wish this, or I wish that, or, you know, I wish this could happen, or I wish I had this, or I wish, and it's like, okay. When you're wishing that a natural born trait that God placed inside of you was different, you're telling God He made a mistake when He gave that to you. And when I would tell them that, it would cause them to think. And they would change their way of thinking to say, you know what? God didn't make a mistake. I'm this way for a reason. I don't have to try to change for anyone because this is how God made me. And if you find that you have allowed comparison to creep in, be honest with yourself. Be honest. All of us have at some point, whether small, big, all of us at some point have looked at another person and maybe said, you know, it's one thing to admire, but comparison is a whole different ball game. I'm not talking about how you admire, oh, that's great. That's cool. But comparison is when you're starting to say, you know what, well, I have this, they have that. I have this, they have that. I want to get this, they want to get that. When you start comparing you to the other person, if you find that you're in that situation, be honest with yourself. It's okay. Be honest with yourself. Identify it. Ask God for forgiveness. That's number one. Ask God to forgive you, because when he made you, he didn't make any mistakes. What he placed inside of you was everything that you needed for you to be successful in this life. Ask him to allow you to see yourself the way he sees you. And ask him to renew your mind to understand that you are one of a kind. Uniquely created by God himself. With a purpose that only you can fulfill. This is the antibiotic for comparison. That's the antibiotic for comparison. Do not allow yourself to go out like Saul. It didn't have to end that way. It didn't. Allowing comparison to kill your purpose and end your life is not God's plan. That's not God's plan for you. God created you with certain characteristics, certain traits, and certain gifts that are meant for you and only you. You have to understand that. What you have inside, God did not place by accident. It wasn't a mistake. There's something that he knows, that there's a specific thing that he's assigned for you to do. And the traits that he's giving you, that he has given you, is for you. The characteristics that he's given you, it's for you. It's not for you to change and be like someone else, because when you compare yourself and you start to try to be like someone else, you're not who God made you. And you can't walk into, it's like that puzzle. You can't fit into a position that you were not intended to fit in. I'm going to say it again. You cannot fit into a position that God did not intend you to fit in. God does not make mistakes, and he definitely did not make a mistake when he formed you. Get in where you fit in. Get in where you fit in. Embrace the traits and characteristics that God gave you, because he has something that you and only you, no one else can do it. And think about it that way. God gave me this because there's something that only I can do with this. Get in where you fit in God's master plan for your life. God doesn't make mistakes. He doesn't make mistakes. And everything he's placed inside of you, the characteristics, the traits, the gifts, the talents, he did that for a reason. Go back to before you were in your mother's womb, I knew you. Before you even were placed on this earth, he knew everything that you would need to carry out his plan for your life. He knew, and you have that. Do not allow comparison to sink in and to rob you of walking in the purpose that God has for your life. Because ultimately, comparison comes from not being fulfilled. That's what comparison is. You're trying to find fulfillment in life. So you're looking here and you're looking there and you're looking at that person saying, you know what, well, they have this and they look happy. Let me see if I can get this. But when you're fulfilled, and fulfillment only comes by walking in the purpose God created you for. That's where fulfillment comes. Not getting what everyone else has or doing what everyone else does. Fulfillment comes from walking in your purpose. When you get to that point, there will be no comparison. Because it will literally be like you're on cloud nine. Because you're so fulfilled with walking in the path that God has for your life. It will be like being on cloud nine. And you will not even focus on what others doing because you're so busy, and not busy in a bad way, but your time is occupied with walking in the plan he has for your life. So you're not going to have time to look at anybody else or compare yourself to what others are doing, because you know, okay, God, this is how you told me to move, so I'm moving this way. God, you told me to do this, so I'm moving this way. You're not looking at, okay, they move this way, so I'm going to move that way. This person moved this way, so I'm going to move this way. No, you're saying, God, you told me to move this way, so I'm going to move that way. God, you told me to move that way, so I'm going to move that way. Every move you make is not dependent upon someone else, but it's dependent upon God. And when you keep your focus, we talked last week about setting your gaze on God. When you set your gaze on God, comparison it won't even be a part of you, because you're so focused on what he has for you to do. Revive fam, I pray that this word from God helps someone today. We're in our season of purpose. He's set us in this direction. I don't know how long we will be talking about purpose. I do know next week that he's already given me a word that ties into purpose. So make sure that, once again, you're subscribed to the channel. If this resonated with you, like this video. And if you find that maybe you know someone who could benefit from hearing about comparison, maybe you know someone whose life is, it's like maybe they could benefit from this because they're always trying to compare or, doing the most. Share this with them. Share it with them so that they can have an understanding that God uniquely created them for a specific purpose, and that every trait and characteristic they have was specifically for them. No one else is made like them, and no one else is made like you. Revive fam, I love you all, and until next time, be blessed.